Hey, Read Through the Word. Today is November 25th. And if you're in the United States of America, today is Thanksgiving. And so, happy Thanksgiving for those of you who are celebrating that today. And today, I am thankful that we are in the book of Romans. You know how much I love Romans. It shows up in practically every lesson we teach. And I am excited to be in the book of Romans, and I think I am in Romans for the next 4 days. Yes. Okay. So, and today's lesson is called Kingdom Conflict. And so let me set up a little bit of what's going on in the book of Romans at this point. So, Wendy started Romans with you yesterday, and she looked at basically the whole idea of sin and why we need to be made new, and all of the implications. So Romans, Paul starts off explaining the gospel. Basically, chapters 1 through 4 are a big explanation of the gospel as far as God saves us by grace through faith, just like he promised he would. That's the story of the Old Testament. People missed it, but that's what he promised he would do for us. He justifies us by declaring us righteous. We've done nothing to earn our salvation. He did everything required. And salvation has come by grace through faith to both Gentile and Jew. And that's Paul's, where Paul is starting with his letter to the church at Rome. So that's what he's explaining to them. And I'm picking up right here where we're exploring salvation. Now that we've seen we have a sin problem, we needed saving. Then now that we're saved, what do we do with it? What do we do? What does this do? What happens now? So let me set a little bit up of what's going on with the letter to the Romans. So this is Paul writing to the church at Rome. It's the only church that Paul writes to that he's never met them, and he didn't start it either. So, some of the churches he started, but then more people came and they'd never met him. He's done neither. There's a unique situation going on in the church of Rome, that when the church started, it was Jew and Gentile. So Jews who became Christians and Gentile believers in Rome. But then in the year 55 AD, Emperor Claudius kicks all the Jews out of Rome. So they're kicked out till the next emperor, and about 5 years later, lets everybody come back. That's why you meet the Jewish believers, Priscilla and Aquila in Corinth, because they were from Rome and had been kicked out, and they were tent makers. But they were Jewish believers, had been kicked out, and that's how Paul meets them. And so when everybody got to come back, then all of a sudden you have a church that was full of Gentile believers, and all these Jewish believers came back, and there's this conflict there. Not the kingdom conflict we're talking about, but that's what's going on. So Paul writes them a letter to deal with, hey, this is how you're the same. You don't look down on them, and you don't look down on them. So when I teach the book of Romans, I always like to have, right now I'm teaching through the book of Romans with my, with an elective in the high school I teach at. And so my class is mainly seniors and juniors in high school. And I do have a nice central aisle in there, because I always like to split and look at how Paul's talking to Jew and Gentile. And so when we get to this point right here, we're in Romans chapters, actually 5 through 8, exploring salvation. What does salvation mean? Now, Romans can be broken up all sorts of ways. I break it up generally into 5 sections. And so we're getting ready to go into, we've looked at sin and salvation. And then as we keep looking, there's So if you have a study Bible, it's probably divided up for you into sections. Typically, you get four, 5, or 6 sections, depending on what scholarly work you're looking at. So we're looking right here in Romans chapter 5 is where we are in today's reading, and we're exploring salvation in this. What is this life that has been made possible and been available to us since we've been made right with God? And Paul does a wonderful explanation of what this means to live as a Christian now. And because it's really about not what we do, but what Christ has done for us. So we are in Romans chapter 5. I would tell you verses 12 through 21. So, oh my word. Okay, just hold on, y'all. We're reading. When Adam sinned, sin entered the world. Adam's sin brought death. So death spread to everyone, for everyone sinned. Yes, people sinned even before the law was given. It was not counted as sin because there was not any law to break. Still, everyone died from the time of Adam to the time of Moses. Even those who did not disobey an explicit commandment of God, as Adam did, were still sinners. What Paul's saying. Now, Adam is a symbol, a representation of Christ who is yet to come. But there's a great difference between Adam's sin and God's gracious gift. For the sin of this one man, Adam, brought death to many. But even greater is God's wonderful grace and his gift of forgiveness to many through the other man, Jesus Christ. Okay, we're going to stop right there. Every bit of me wants to read all of it, and let's just stop and talk. But for the sake of time, that's not possible today. So, where to start? Where to stop? That's my real big problem, is I'm going to do every bit of it. I think I want us to really take a look at what's going on here as Paul makes his argument. If we understand that Romans is basically one long theological argument divided into sections, and with Paul being the master of the argument, that before the question even pops up in your mind, he's answering. It's the beauty of Paul building the argument and the use of questions by Paul. So pay attention to how many questions he's asking in there, because then he answers. And he's answering the questions that form in our minds as we read his letter. So he's anticipating the question that will come and then giving the answer. And then so the argument he's building all the way through, each part builds on the next. And so by the time you're done with the letter, you're like, oh, I get it. So it's one big argument. So here's what he's saying in chapter 5 is talking about comparing kingdoms. And remember, if we're looking at the gospel, that's what we've been reading through, the gospel and what it's meant. But now that we have a sin problem and salvation has dealt with our sin problem, what now? What now? And how does this all work out? What is the basis of our justification? What are the benefits of our justification? So we've been made right with Christ. Then what we have laid before us is Paul tells us, here's the issue. You're like, what's all this with Adam and Christ? There are two kingdoms. And there's a conflict between the two kingdoms. So the first kingdom is the kingdom of Adam. The kingdom of Adam is the one in which we were born. We were born into the kingdom of Adam. Through Adam, we got sin and we got death. That's what it says. Death reigned through Adam. A good picture to see how this shows up is in Genesis chapter 5 that we discussed way back in January. One of the chapters everybody skips, but take a look at the death that reigned in Adam. And so you see you have death and we have sin And because of Adam's sin that is inherited by us, we have a problem. And how is this problem dealt with? There's another kingdom. There's the kingdom of Christ, into which we must be born. Well, Lisa, we've already been born. How is this possible? Well, Nicodemus asked the same question in John chapter 3. We've been born into the kingdom of Adam, the kingdom of sin and death. But then there's another kingdom. There's the kingdom of Christ. And we can be born again. And we can be born into that kingdom. And so we're born into that kingdom. And through that kingdom, we have grace, eternal life, all of those. So everything that Paul explains to us in Romans chapter 5 that has to do that what is the benefits of our justification? What do we get as a member of this new kingdom? But here's the really hard part. The conflict between the two kingdoms. Because guess what? This kingdom, wouldn't it be great when we were born again into the new kingdom, the kingdom of Christ, that this all fell away and went away. But it doesn't. That kingdom still is there. There's two kingdoms that conflict in our bodies. One, which our human bodies were born into. They know how to live in the kingdom of Adam. We know how to live where sin reigns and death is a consequence. It's hard to live in the kingdom of Christ. It's about grace and eternal life and the benefits of justification and what it is to live as a Christian. So there's this conflict that's between these two kingdoms. Because this kingdom never went away. It's still there. We were born into this. We were born again into this one. But this one's still here. It never went away. Which creates a big old conflict within inside of us. That's what Paul talks about sanctification. How do we deal with that? What do we do with the tension that exists between us in the kingdom of Adam and the kingdom of Christ? How do we live? What do we do? The big key in this is to not see ourselves as we see sin and death. Is to look at this. Is to look at the kingdom of Christ. What happened that we could be born again into the kingdom of Christ? Because that is where our true identity lies. Our true identity is found in the gospel. That's what Paul's telling us. Our identity found in the kingdom of Christ. Our true identity is found there. So what does that mean? It means this. That we let God's opinion of us define us. Not this. Not the kingdom of sin and death. But the kingdom of Christ that we've been born again into. What happened to bring us into that kingdom? Well, the death of Jesus on the cross. Then what does God think of you? The cross. Let the gospel show you, be your identity. And so we let God's opinion of us, not the sin and death and the consequences of that. We let God's opinion of us define who we are. What's God's opinion of us? Look at the cross of Jesus. That's what Paul's just explained to us. What was necessary for us to be born again into the kingdom of Christ. That's God's opinion of us. We were worth Him sending His Son to die for us so that we could be born again into the kingdom of Christ and then live totally different than the kingdom of Adam. But which kingdom are we letting win in our life? Because this one never goes away. We're going to be dealing with it until we go to glorification. We're going to be dealing with that kingdom of Adam. Let Christ reign in your mind, in your body, and in your life, because that's the kingdom that defines you. And Paul has a whole lot more to tell us. We'll see you next time on Read Through the Word.